Hi, everyone. Welcome to Softly Spoken English. I'm Sophia. I'm really happy you're here today. Maybe you're on your way to work, folding the laundry, making yourself a coffee, or simply taking a little break. Whatever you're doing, thanks for letting me keep you company for a while. Today, we're going to talk about a tiny little word that I absolutely love because it's small, but it can completely change the way a sentence feels. You know what's funny? Even is one of those words that almost nobody talks about, but once you notice it, you'll hear it everywhere. In movies, podcasts, YouTube videos, people use it all the time. I remember thinking, I understand the sentence, but why did they put even there? If you've ever felt the same way, you're definitely not alone. What I like about even is that it doesn't really have one simple translation. Instead, it adds a feeling to what you're saying. Sometimes it's surprise, sometimes it's emphasis, sometimes it makes something sound stronger without adding many words. It's one of those little details that can make your English sound much more natural. And today, I'd love to show you why. Don't worry, this isn't going to feel like a grammar lesson. I'd much rather show you how people naturally use even when they're talking to friends, family, or coworkers. As we go through today's examples, try not to think about memorizing rules. Just listen to how the word fits into each situation. I think that's the easiest, and honestly the most enjoyable, way to learn it. Let's imagine a simple conversation. Someone asks, "Have you started reading that book yet?" You smile and say, "I haven't even opened it." That's a sentence you'll hear all the time. Without even, you're simply saying you haven't started. But when you add even, you're quietly emphasizing that you haven't reached the very first step yet. It's such a small change, but it says a lot. Here's another one I hear quite often. A friend asks, "Did you watch the new movie everyone is talking about?" And the answer is, "I haven't even watched the trailer." I love this example because it shows exactly what even does. You're saying, not only have I not seen the movie, I haven't done the smallest thing related to it. It feels so natural once you start noticing these patterns. Now, here's something interesting. We often use even when we're talking about something that surprises us a little. Imagine your friend says, "Wow, you woke up at 5 this morning?" And you answer, "Yes, I even went for a run before work." The run is the surprising part. That's exactly why even sounds so natural there. It highlights something the listener probably wasn't expecting to hear. Let's change the situation. Maybe you're telling someone about your weekend. You could say, "The weather was amazing. We even had lunch outside." Again, even isn't there because of grammar. It's there because you're adding a small detail that makes the story a little more interesting. Native speakers do this all the time without thinking about it, and once you notice it, you'll probably start doing the same. I think this is one of the reasons even can feel confusing at first. It doesn't really change the basic meaning of a sentence. Instead, it changes the feeling. It tells the other person, "Hey, this part is important," or "This might surprise you." That's why you can't always translate it word for word. Sometimes it's better to focus on the idea rather than the translation. For example, imagine someone asks how your vacation was. You smile and say, "It was wonderful. I even learned how to surf." Learning to surf wasn't the whole vacation, but it's the detail that makes the story more memorable. That's one of my favorite things about English. Sometimes one tiny word can quietly guide the listener's attention without changing the whole sentence. Here's another sentence you'll probably hear quite often. "Even my dad liked it." Maybe you're talking about a movie, a restaurant, or a new recipe. Why is that interesting? Because you're suggesting your dad usually doesn't like those kinds of things. Without saying it directly, even helps people understand there's a little surprise hidden inside your sentence. I really like how naturally English does that, and that's something worth paying attention to. Even often carries a feeling that's never explained out loud. The speaker doesn't need to say, "This was surprising." The word already does that job. It's almost like a quiet hint to the listener. The more English you hear, the more you'll notice these little hints, and they make conversations feel warmer, more expressive, and much more natural. Now let's look at a sentence you may have heard before. I don't even know. I absolutely love this one because people use it all the time. Sometimes they're confused, sometimes they're surprised, and sometimes they're simply out of words. It's not just about not knowing the answer. It adds a feeling of, I honestly have no idea. It's simple, natural, and incredibly common. You can hear the same idea in sentences like, I don't even remember, or I don't even care. In all of these examples, even adds extra emphasis. It's almost like saying, not at all, but in a much softer, more conversational way. These are the kinds of expressions you'll start recognizing everywhere once you begin paying attention to them. One thing I've noticed is that learners often try to translate even before they use it. I completely understand why. We all do that with a new language. But with words like this, translation isn't always the best approach. Instead, try listening to how native speakers use it. Little by little, you'll start connecting the word to the feeling instead of a dictionary definition. Let's imagine another situation. Your friend asks if you finished cleaning the house. You laugh and say, I haven't even started cleaning yet. That's probably something we've all said at some point. Again, even emphasizes the distance between where you are now and where people expected you to be. It's a tiny word, but it says so much with so little. Here's another example I hear quite often. I can't even explain it. Maybe you've had one of those moments when something feels impossible to describe. Instead of saying, I can't explain it, adding even makes the sentence sound more emotional. It tells the listener that you've tried to find the words, but nothing seems good enough. And then there's a phrase you'll probably hear online all the time. I can't even. That's it. Just those 3 words. It's an informal expression people use when they're overwhelmed, shocked, or sometimes laughing so much they don't know what to say. Grammatically, the sentence feels unfinished, but in everyday English, people understand exactly what it means because the emotion fills in the rest. Now, let's look at a different use of even. Imagine you're trying a new restaurant with a friend. After dinner, you smile and say, the dessert was even better than the main course. Here, even isn't expressing surprise in the same way as before. Instead, it's helping you make a comparison. You're saying that something was better than you already expected, and it makes your opinion sound much more natural. You'll hear this pattern everywhere. This book is even more interesting. Today's weather is even nicer. The second season was even funnier. Once you start paying attention, you'll notice that even often appears before words like better, more, less, or worse. It quietly strengthens the comparison without making the sentence feel dramatic. I think this is one of the easiest uses to remember because we naturally compare things every day. Maybe your coffee tastes even better on a cold morning. Maybe your bed feels even more comfortable after a long day at work. These aren't special situations. They're just ordinary moments, and that's exactly why this use of even becomes part of your everyday English. Something I really enjoy about learning languages is noticing these little patterns. At first, they seem almost invisible. Then, one day, you suddenly hear them everywhere. It's a bit like buying a new car and then seeing the same model on every street. The word didn't suddenly become popular. You simply trained your brain to notice it. I think language works in a very similar way. So here's a little challenge for you. The next time you watch a movie or listen to a podcast in English, don't worry about understanding every single word. Instead, listen for even. Every time you hear it, ask yourself one simple question. Why did the speaker choose to use it here? That small habit can teach you much more than memorizing a list of translations. And don't be surprised if you start catching yourself smiling when you recognize it. That's actually one of my favorite moments when learning a language. It's the moment you stop translating and simply begin understanding. Those little victories may seem small, but they build confidence over time. And honestly, that's how real progress usually happens. One small step, one conversation, and sometimes one tiny word at a time. Before we move on, I want to mention something that helped me when I was learning languages. Instead of asking, "What does this word mean?" I started asking, "Why did the speaker choose this word?" Those are two very different questions. When you become curious about the speaker's intention, words like even begin to make much more sense because you notice the feeling behind them, not just the translation. Let's look at another example. Imagine someone says, "Even my little brother can do it." The speaker isn't only talking about their brother, they're suggesting that the task is probably easier than you think. Without saying it directly, even creates a comparison in your mind. That's one of the reasons it's such a useful word. It communicates ideas that don't always need to be explained. Here's another sentence I hear quite often. "She even remembered my birthday." Why does that sound special? Because the speaker wasn't expecting it. Maybe they thought she had forgotten, or maybe they didn't know her very well. The word even quietly tells us there was an element of surprise. It's amazing how one small word can completely change the feeling of a sentence. Now imagine you're telling a story about your weekend. You could say, "We walked around the city, visited a museum, and we even found a beautiful little cafe." That last detail feels like a pleasant surprise. It makes the story a bit more interesting without needing dramatic words. That's exactly how native speakers often use even when they're sharing experiences. One thing you'll probably notice is that even doesn't always need a perfect translation. Sometimes, if you try to translate every single word, the sentence actually becomes harder to understand. That's completely normal. Languages don't always match each other word for word. Sometimes it's much easier to understand the message first and let the translation come naturally later. I think that's one of the biggest changes that happens as your English improves. At the beginning, we translate almost everything. Then, little by little, we begin to recognize patterns instead. That's when speaking starts to feel lighter. You spend less time searching for words and more time enjoying the conversation. And honestly, I think that's a wonderful feeling. There's another expression I'd love to show you, even if. At first, it looks similar to the examples we've already seen, but it works a little differently. Imagine saying, "Even if it rains, we'll go for a walk." You're saying that the rain won't change your decision. In other words, the condition exists, but it isn't strong enough to stop your plans. I like this expression because we use it all the time when we're talking about possibilities. Even if I'm tired, I'll finish this today. Or, even if nobody comes, we'll still have fun. It gives your sentence a calm, confident feeling. You're showing that you've already thought about what could happen, and your decision stays the same. Now let's compare that with another expression you'll hear very often, even though. Imagine someone asks how your weekend was, and you answer, "Even though it rained all day, we had a great time." This time, you're talking about something that really happened, not something that might happen. That's the biggest difference, and once you notice it, it becomes much easier to remember. I used to mix these two expressions up because they look so similar. Maybe you've done the same, but here's a simple way to think about them. Even if looks toward the future or an imagined situation, even though looks back at something that's already true. You don't have to memorize a complicated rule. Just think about whether the situation is real or only possible. The nice thing is that both expressions sound very natural in everyday conversations. Native speakers use them without thinking, And after enough listening, you probably will too. That's why I always encourage people to notice these patterns instead of trying to memorize every detail. Your brain is much better at recognizing familiar sounds than we sometimes give it credit for. If you listen carefully this week, I have a feeling you'll start hearing even if, and even though much more often than before. Not because people suddenly started using them, but because now you know what to listen for. And I think that's one of the most satisfying parts of learning a language. Suddenly, things that used to pass unnoticed begin to stand out all on their own. You know what I find interesting? Before today's episode, you probably thought even was just another small English word. But now, I hope you're starting to see it differently. It's not really about the word itself. It's about the feeling it brings to a sentence. And once you understand that, using it becomes much more natural than trying to remember a translation. Sometimes people ask me, how can I sound more natural in English? My answer is almost never, learn bigger words. It's usually the opposite. Pay attention to the small ones. Words like even, just, still, and already quietly shape the rhythm of a conversation. They're easy to overlook, but they're often the words that make someone sound comfortable and confident. So the next time you're speaking English, don't worry about using even perfectly. Just be curious. Listen for it. Notice where it appears. And if a sentence feels natural to you, try using a similar one the next time you're talking with someone. That's one of the simplest ways to build confidence without putting too much pressure on yourself. I've learned that language becomes much more enjoyable when we stop chasing perfection. Nobody speaks beautifully all the time, not even native speakers. We pause, we change our minds, we look for the right word, and sometimes we laugh at our own mistakes. That's part of communication, and I think it's a nice reminder that learning a language doesn't have to feel so serious all the time. If there's one idea I'd love you to remember from today, it's this. Words like even aren't difficult because they're complicated. They're difficult because they're subtle. They carry emotion, emphasis, and little shades of meaning that become clearer every time you hear them. So instead of trying to master them overnight, simply let yourself notice them more often. And maybe that's the best part of learning a language. One day you suddenly realize you're understanding things that used to confuse you. Not because you memorized every rule, but because you've heard those patterns enough times for them to feel familiar. I think those quiet moments of progress are worth celebrating, even if they're easy to miss at first. Before we finish, I'd like to leave you with a little challenge. Over the next few days, pay attention whenever you hear the word even. It could be in a movie, a TV show, a podcast, or maybe a conversation at work. Don't stop to analyze it. Just notice it. I have a feeling you'll be surprised by how often people use it once your ears know what they're listening for. And if you catch yourself using even this week, don't worry about getting it perfect. That's never the goal. Language grows through repetition, curiosity, and real experiences. Every conversation teaches you something, even the ones that feel a little uncomfortable. In fact, those are often the conversations we learn the most from, even if we don't realize it right away. I think that's one of the reasons I enjoy learning languages so much. There isn't one magical moment when everything suddenly makes sense. Instead, it's a collection of small discoveries. One day you understand a joke. Another day you notice a new expression. And then, without realizing it, you find yourself speaking with a little more confidence than you had before. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I really hope this little word doesn't feel quite so mysterious anymore. The next time you hear someone say, I don't even know, or it's even better than I expected, maybe you'll smile for a second and think, I know exactly why they said that. Take care of yourself. Keep listening. Keep noticing the little things. And most importantly, keep enjoying the process. Learning English isn't about being perfect. It's about feeling a little more comfortable every time you use it. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next episode.